And I'm going to double move over here on this other computer too. Record computer. Okay, so double recording. So this would be for note taking. We can go back and listen to the notes as well as write them in here. So yeah, so it was just to have an open discussion to look at these different, you know, from sort of a broader view, to hear what everyone's questions are, what your ideas are. And Pauline, you know, your outlines seem like a good sort of a framework for, you know, sort of addressing some of these questions. So I put that up on our Google Doc, which, let me put the link in again if you want to open it up here. So I put it into the Zoom chat window. And if you click on that, you should be able to open up into the Google Doc. And I thought we'd just have an open discussion about the topics and any questions, and then we can take notes. And we'll also have a recording of this meeting to go back to, you know, to get, you know, to get notes from. And that just through a general discussion, we can sort of like, you know, kind of flesh out the vision and the purpose, and sort of see what direction we really want to go. Our other group, Empathy Team 1, is the people in that group, most of them don't have a deep experience with empathy. So having done this Listening Well book has worked really well, you know, with everybody's, you know, has gotten into it. But my sense is everyone here already has a deeper experience, has been teaching empathy, has been studying empathy. So this is a good group to kind of take the bigger picture and kind of explore, what would be really the most effective way to, do online training? Is that even something that we want to do? Really have kind of like the big picture. So, so I thought we just kind of do open discussion and just, no reflective listening to start with. You can just do, simple reflective listening, kind of free if you want, or if you could request it if you feel you're not understood. And we'll just kind of, so the overall question is, how might we co-design an online empathy training MOOC? And, we have, so how does all that sound, I guess, to start? What does everyone think? Okay.
Yeah, sounds like a good place to start.
Good place to start. Okay. Then how do we do this? What is you had, Pauline, you start off with clarity, purpose, and vision, and the need.
Yeah.
And do you actually want to kind of lead through your list here?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess the idea of clarifying the purpose and the vision and the need comes from the chaotic sort of stepping stones. Have you heard of them? So within the art hosting community, chaotic is a word that combines chaos and order. So when you're working in complexity, how do you design a process that enables you to handle all of the instability of the field that you're in and still drive forward something that's purposeful, but without it necessarily being linear? Because it doesn't feel like this is very linear. It's kind of got to go here, it's got to go there, and it might wander over here, and other people might get involved, and it'll take its own shape. So with chaotic framework, the clarification of, first of all, the need. So is the need for this work, so what is it that's calling to be done in the world that needs this approach? What is kind of our vision and purpose around that? It feels like if you can get that established and agreed, you've got a really strong container, because then you can then rest back. Is this answering the need? Is this meeting? Does this reflect the vision? Does this reflect our purpose?
Lorraine, I definitely agree with you, and I love the notion that there is even a concept called chaotic. I'll definitely look into that. it brings a sense of understanding to me of what's happening. But I think the most important question before we do the what is the why.
Yeah.
Why are we doing this? Why do we need to do this? Why now? I love those questions. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I will join on the thank you as well. I love this idea of why. I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek, who is like the guru of like why, like, and it helps to ground, like you're talking about, like if I understand, like in the chaos, like what's grounding is to know like why are we here, why. It's very grounding to me, and it's and if we get lost and if it gets chaotic, we can go back and like, oh, hold on, like what I'm doing over there, it does not actually meet my needs, so it helps me to ground back.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So can we answer the question why?
Why?
Does anybody want to answer that question? Why are we doing this? Why is this course needed?
Yeah.
When Pauline, you were starting to talk about the why, I took this quote that I always have on my fridge, and I cannot really explain better. It's a quote from Audrey Lord. It is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. That's my why. I want a world where we can live very differently. And I believe it's possible when we are all on the same page about being interested and intentional about understanding our differences and using empathy as a connection tool.
Yeah. Wow, that's perfect. That's amazing. I really resonate with that. That sense of connection. Yeah.
If I can add to that, I would say that we don't learn empathy at school like we learn history or English.
Yeah.
And I think we are thirsty as human beings in knowing how to do it. It doesn't come naturally, so I also read more and more that companies, hospitals, any kind of useful, important houses, families, without empathy, there is no connection, and so that's my why.
Yeah.
If I may add to the why, I think what you said, Jessica, about connection is really the key, is that I believe that we live in a world of disconnect now, with the issues of war that we are disconnected from, the issues of understanding good and clear and concise conversation and communication, what that means. And the issue of isolation that I believe the world operates under now, even with you looking at children and using their iPhones. I drove home with my grandson yesterday, and he didn't want to engage at all. He was completely happy being isolated on his phone with his game. And for me, the next generation do not look for engagement. They are happy and comfortable with isolation, which to me is a lack of connection. So I think this needs to have a basis in how do we connect, as well as how do we understand and learn about empathy. I think if there is no connection, there cannot be an understanding of what empathy is.
Yeah.
Yeah, as Benita, what I'm hearing, you observing with through your grandson what the future looks like
Yeah.
for a lot of the young generation, me included. I'm 36. I'm still I like to consider myself young. And how you think empathy is the solution to go back to the connection.
Yes.
I've got a lot of stuff coming up around the kind of binary way that we deal with things, which feels really primitive now, in terms of the political system. There's a left wing and a right wing, there's the good guys and the bad guys, this constant polarity. And it feels like sometimes you have to take a side, you have to take a stand, or you have to argue or advocate or debate your point of view rather than seek a common ground. So for the big complex problems that we face, and this is for me the need for something massive and online rather than small group of people, we don't have time to allow things to proliferate gradually. There needs to be a kind of almost a quantum shift to empathy. And if I hadn't participated in ULab, I wouldn't imagine it was possible to create a massive online course that could have impact on values and behaviour and orientation. But I've seen it, I've participated in it. So I really do see that there is a need for a way of learning about empathy and the value, even the urgent need for it in this moment, this historical moment, in order that we can have a different approach to that adversarial, us and them approach. So to me, empathy is something like the middle way. It's a bit more like Buddhism. It's a bit more like, okay, we can have room for everyone and everything. It's not a scarcity kind of situation where you've got to protect your own views and your own stuff. It's actually, for me, it connects into generosity, it connects into mutuality, something around being willing to sacrifice short-term gains for a longer-term benefit for humanity, which sounds a bit lofty, but I think you can do that on a really small scale as well. But using a MOOC to refract that, I think, could be so powerful.
It's a little bit, Pauline, as if we switched that lever. Instead of having the default going into war, let's have the default position going into empathy.
Yeah, beautiful. I like that. Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. What would life be like if that was the default? How do you get, how do you steer towards that outcome? That's definitely a quantum shift.
It seems to me that then one of the answers to the question of why is that there's a global need.
Yeah.
There's a culturally, globally, societally. This is not something that is housed in or needs to be placed in one container, as you called it, Pauline. This is required for the bigger container.
Yeah.
But I'm going to ask the question of why is it required?
Why, you mean, why do we need connection and empathy?
Yeah, so I think that's going to answer part of the why.
That's funny. For me, that's going back to my question I had actually last week about on page 3 in the book, like William says that it's actually it's about our survival.
There you go.
Why is and I was wondering why why is it our survival?
I remember.
Yeah.
And you're still there with the question.
And I'm still there with the question. If someone has an answer, please share it with me.
Edwin, do we have any references to any of the literature on why empathy is about survival?
Yeah, I was just writing that. I've been writing like crazy here to,
I know, it's
to
brilliant.
reflect back what I'm hearing so far. And it's like, why is it about our survival? Was the question. What is that? There's, different people have written about that. Like Simon Baron Cohen, he had talked about that. That there's, it's people. There's Jeremy Rifkin. So there's plenty of people who have talked about the importance of it. For me, it's I think it's that the empathy. I mean, I've kind of dedicated the rest of my life to fostering empathy, and it's just that for me, it's that I just see that it addresses personal and social problems. Like in my family, who are very I talked to them about empathy, and they didn't really understand what I was talking about. But then once a fight started in my family, and I was able to mediate it with empathy, by listening to all parties and then have them dialogue with each other, and it turned into a family kind of empathy circle, and it kind of ended with everybody hugging everyone else. So it was going from this disconnection, that's what I was hearing a lot about, this disconnection, conflict, a fight, to hearing each other and being able to work through and creating this feeling of kind of a beautiful connection where people were kind of holding hands and, so I guess in that sense, it's family survival. It's like those are like personal stories. I guess, what are our personal stories of survival, with empathy? So that's what comes up.
Right. Wow. And also, as you're telling the story, Adrian, it comes to mind that once everyone is hugging, we have a healthier mental survival going forward.
Kind of a well-being, a sense of well-being. So it's not just surviving, but well-being.
So because the jump I'm making in my head when I'm hearing you about how you say empathy addresses personal and social challenges, and how you mentioned the family, how in the end everybody hugged, and that reminded me that we are animals and we are hardwired. I was going to say we are hardwired for hugs. we need this physical contact. I was amazed. My therapist 3 years ago told me that during World War II, the babies who were orphans, they had hired women their job was to hug the babies, so that physically, because they had noticed that babies, even though they were fed, kept warm and stuff, some baby would die, and they realized that it was just the touch that was missing, that physical contact touch. And so maybe that's it. Maybe empathy is giving us this big hug that we need for our physical, even neurological, biological body and mind to stay alive. For me, that's starting to answer the question of the why it's important for our survival. So, I'm having an answer.
Babies need touch. Babies, to keep babies healthy, and I have heard of in where was it in Ceausescu? Where was he? What country was that?
Romania.
Romania. So they had a policy there of taking babies and putting them into orphanages, and they said no touch.
Yeah.
And so they had a philosophy of no touch, and it just created huge damage to the children. Is this? I mean, when I even think about it, these children just, they're not being touched, no physical contact. If they cried, they just let them cry, and just, I mean, it's just like heartbreaking to just even think about that, and just the you know, the pain that they went through, and all the kind of the mental problems they kind of developed from that. So that's just kind of what the lack of touch, and maybe this about survival, you know, that was just, they kind of lived, but they were just so emotionally damaged.
Can I say something, Jessica, about the survival thing? For me, my sense is that the crises that we're facing, sort of globally, environmentally, socially, economically, war, conflict, etc., is partly to do with a sort of empathy deficit. Because while we continue to perpetuate a system, so this is getting, to me, going from the individual relationship level to the systemic level, while we perpetuate systems that require some people to be oppressed so that other people can thrive, that require a duality and a binary and a projection of the shadow almost onto others because of race or, you know, ethnicity or, you know, gender. Well, we ignore that intersectional inequality and we don't take account of our privilege, that lack of empathy, you know, which might result in a very wealthy, white, privileged person saying, I know you're black, I know you're poor, I know you're female, I know you're disabled, but, you know, get on with it. I had to. That lack of understanding and that almost that cruelty in terms of, yeah, we're all equal. So for me, there's a kind of a subtle level of understanding that people need to get around their own blind spots. You know, if you happen to be privileged, to be born in the West, to be born, you know, like with a degree of, you know, to have even the ability to have an education or to have an income or to be somewhere where there isn't war and you're not living in fear and you're not abused and so on, that you have a level of privilege. So the empathy part for me is about how do you help people non-defensively to see into their own privilege and to understand that it's not like an act of God, that it's just actually how the dice have fallen, you know, that you're here and I'm there. And how do you engage people in opening their hearts without them being completely destroyed by that, you know, awareness?
I'm not hearing Pauline.
Can you still hear me? Hello?
I was able to hear you, Pauline. I think it's Rita who's I can hear now.
I can hear now.
I heard you.
I heard Pauline as well.
Okay.
Are you okay, Rita? Is your...
No, it's good. It was going on and on.
Oh, you might want to. If it could be your bandwidth, or you can always try stopping your video might help the audio.
So if I can reflect, Pauline, to make sure I really understand, like it's for you, empathy is why we need a course like that. Why we need empathy is to be able to engage in difficult conversation about equality, gender, justice, inequalities, and I also heard like funny. It's a big the white privilege thing is a lot on discussion here. I know in Toronto there's a lot of conferences happening about that, and it's what I'm hearing is like you're saying empathy will also be able to go in that place that we can talk without being defensive, that our white good manners will not get in the way, and then we can actually talk about what colonizer did and like how we can engage in conversation like that.
Yeah, that's brilliant. you.
Yeah, the other part
I love
was,
that, yeah.
the other part I was hearing was that, I guess what privilege was meaning was that we're born into a situation, and being aware that, you know, if you had been born in, you know, the slums of Calcutta, that, you know, you wouldn't be wealthy in the United States or something. You wouldn't be having all this. So just realizing there's a roll of the dice that happened, that just by chance, by luck, that you're in this situation, have that awareness.
So it's not about entitlement, then. It needs to be about a conversation about entitlement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
May I also reflect back to Pauline, one of the things that I heard you say that went along with that notion of entitlement and rolling the dice. I wouldn't be here if there were a different roll of the dice. I would be in your shoes, which is brilliant. I think that what was really poignant and profound is your statement that the lack of empathy, it equals cruelty, actually. Because you can boil it right down to a notion of the cruelness of a lack of empathy. That's quite, for me, that's pretty profound. I found that quite profound, so thank you.
Thank you. That's interesting that you've highlighted that, because I think I must have said that quite unconsciously.
You did.
I'm thinking cruelty is the opposite of kindness. Kindness is about treating everyone as kin, which is empathy in action, isn't it? Love and kindness.
I also, if I may, like to reflect on the issue of lack of hugs and touches for children is that I don't know whether there have been studies or not on actual touch for adults as well, but I think that there's a need for actual touching, whether it's having your hand held or a hand around your shoulder, or just even, it doesn't need to, it needs, could be as minimal as eye contact. I believe that is still a need even as an adult.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really aligned with what you're saying, Bunny.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I feel we're clear on the why and why we need it. Rita, do you want to add something?
Thank you. The only thing I wanted to add is that in listening well, William was saying that in his career, he almost always has been able to teach empathy. But a few people who are, I don't know if he said that, but in my mind, who are sociopath or have some deficit of empathy. So as much as it's teachable, he also says that the difference between a good doctor and a not as powerful doctor is it is on or her own level of ability to have empathy.
Okay, so empathy is teachable.
Yeah, good news.
It gives us a direction to go. It's like, we know we need it for our survival, and we know that empathy is teachable. And
yeah, and it's quite exciting to be able to say something that succinct. Empathy is this, empathy is that. It's teachable. You have a few bold statements, to draw someone in as to why should I spend time doing a MOOC to learn about empathy. Yeah.
Well, in terms of it being teachable, the thing that happened to kind of from a science point of view to substantiate that is just how neurons work. that the brain can rewire itself. So if if our brain has been wired to get upset really quickly if somebody says something, to get defensive, that's a neural wiring, right? The pathways, somebody kept, doing that same thing over and over again, those pathways became stronger. So the idea is that if we practice empathy, if we're practicing it, that we're strengthening those neural networks. And as those networks become deeper, kind of more ingrained, they get deeper and deeper and stronger. So that's just the physiological kind of explanation that the brain can be rewired, and that the more you do an action, the stronger that response is. So the more we do empathy, the better we get at it. But we're sort of like in the business of rewiring brains.
That's exciting. Write it down.
Rewiring brains, and also having the fitness component, in the sense that you need the repetition in order to for the brain to do it automatically eventually.
May I offer a scenario, a case study, if you will, is that I know a child who has been diagnosed with a lack of empathy. So if we're talking about a teachable skill, would you call empathy as a skill? If we're talking
being, maybe.
Pardon me, Edwin?
Way of being. I mean, it's a skill and way of being. I think
that's what. Being. Yes, you're absolutely right. So I'll go back to then repeat what Rita said, is it isn't something they teach in schools. So if there is, and I would suggest that this child is not the only child that is like that, if it is teachable, then where are they going to learn? How are they going to learn? And possibly we can categorize them with adults who don't have any empathy and who have not been diagnosed as it being a problem that there is no empathy. So I'm not sure if we need to go to the how. It's just a scenario that shocked me. I had no idea that there could be a child who had no empathy.
Can you say more? What was the situation? Was it like, is it with being, is that with, what do you call it, autism, or was it psychopathy, or just something else?
Not at all. Not at all. She's perfectly lovely as a child. She is warm and loving beyond what I've seen in other children, but without the capacity to empathize to her peers.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite astounding to see. I'm not sure if it has anything to do with status in the family. I'm not sure, but it just shocked me. So where do you go from there, right? No schooling. There is no schooling. How can it be teachable then? What's the model for teaching a child empathy?
Well, I would start with kind of questioning the diagnosis, like who's doing the diagnosis, and
the psychiatrist.
Yeah, that doesn't. I mean, there's all kinds of psychiatrists. There's been studies. Like one of the things that Bill Miller talks about is, he sent me a paper about the importance of empathy for therapy. That it's like critical, and there were studies that. I heard Carl Rogers mention, where they looked at like 10 psychologists and how good they were at empathizing, and about 25% were pretty good. You know, there was like the middle range, and then it was like 3 or 4 that weren't all that good, were pretty low on this. They had the psychologists do empathic listening, and then they had 40 other psychologists rate them in terms of observing how they were doing. And he was just making the point. So there's a real spectrum within the psychologists as well. So I would be, you know, to begin with, I'd be very kind of skeptical about someone just saying they don't have any empathy, and not even basing it on, is it psychopathy? Is it based on autism? What is the basis of that? So I guess, yeah, that's.
And even if we're looking at the source of the diagnosis or the study, it still leaves us with the question of what do we do with that? What do we do with a child or any children? They don't teach this in school.
Yeah.
Yet. Like I mean, Rita and I, we're working together on like offering empathy workshops in Francophone schools in Ontario, and we started with parents, and it's amazing how it's I think there's a lot of different ways, and the MOOC is one way, probably for adults to go back to practicing empathy. And when I say go back, I believe as most childs naturally are empathic, and we learned not to, because we learned not to be vulnerable. So I believe it's a matter of just reconnecting the dots, and I think there's a lot of different places that needs to be taught, modeled. I believe teachers need to model that, not necessarily doing empathy circle in classes, which it would be great, but parents at home, organizations, peers, co-workers. Like I think if we like Pauline was talking about a quantum shift, if the whole culture acts like that, if everybody models it. Right now, the model is don't be vulnerable, kick some ass, and walk around with a huge shield and be perfect, and things are maybe going to be okay. And we know it's not true. Yeah. We're here because we all know it's not true. That model does not work anymore.
Yeah, that's so true.
One thing I wanted to just in terms of children, like, and learning empathy, like my brother is very conservative, you know, a Trump supporter, for example. And it's a very, you know, there's signs on, and he has 4 children, there's signs on the wall that said obedience, you know, so it's very, you know, it's a rather authoritarian sort of family structure. And the kids are always beating up on each other. So they're always like fighting, and, you know, the way they solve problem is kind of who beats who up. And when I go there, I start doing, you know, empathic listening. So there's a fight, and I start doing listening to one, listening to the other. And then I've been getting them to start empathizing with each other, kind of doing reflective listening to kind of work through their issues. And they're like, you know, 5 years to 7 years old, you know, actually some are younger now. And when we do these circles, when I do with them, my niece, who's 5 years old, you know, we do one of these, and then she says, I like empathy circles, let's do it again, right? So it's like, there's kind of like this dynamic, which is very kind of authoritarian, but I see that it can be, you know, empathy and kind of a, you know, authoritarian versus empathic dialogue that, people respond to it and value it. They just maybe haven't had, a lot of practice and skill building around it. So I'm very,
Even more than that, Edwin, I'm hearing you giving them permission. Before even understanding and practicing is like giving them permission and the safe space to do it.
Yeah.
Even within the, Jessica, even within the model, the authoritarian model that we're living with, it's pretty amazing to be able to empower children, even within that model.
There is there is a disconnect, Bernie, when you're talking about that little girl. You say on one hand she can be loving and warm, and at the same time she has been diagnosed as having no empathy, and somehow I connect warm and loving relationship with others as being based in empathy. Am I making that up?
I'm sure you're not, Rita. I don't understand the disconnect as well because of what you're saying. There is such a disparate interaction. Her actions are disparate from one moment to another.
So it may also be a difference of settings.
Maybe. But I understand that you are aware of a program, Rita, that promotes empathy by babies, with babies.
Yes, in Canadian school, there is this woman who invented this empathy. Forget how it's called.
Roots of empathy.
What?
Roots of empathy.
Yeah. Exactly.
In Toronto.
Yeah. Yeah, she's apparently going through the world, and she's being supported by it seems to have grown a lot. So she goes with a baby into classrooms, and throughout the year they go in a circle, they put the baby in the middle, something like that, and then they explore the baby's feelings and needs, and they say it makes a difference. The kids are more empathic with each other as a result.
So I have a question based on the conversation, where the conversation is going. But before, I think I saw Pauline raising her hand a few times. Do you want to say something, Pauline?
I suppose I just wanted to pick up on another thread that came through what you were saying, Edwin, just a little while ago. And you have been talking this way from the beginning, and I don't know if it's been highlighted enough that you're talking about dialogue and you're talking about listening, and I think that's really fundamental. That in terms of what empathy is and how you can engender empathy in people, I don't really know if that's within anyone's gift, because it's very personal process. But definitely I recognize that you can teach listening skills. You can help people to understand how they're currently listening, how to improve their listening, the difference between different kinds of listening, and the impact that it has when you are being deeply listened to without judgment. And that in itself is transformative. And what I've noticed with the ULab, which is an online course, it's very dense and there's a lot of content, and people get very enthusiastic at the beginning and then they fall behind. So the very first module, if you like, of ULab is very much about empathy and listening. And that's what people get the most out of and what they find transformative. And they report back and they say, wow, I can't believe what a difference it made just withholding judgment, just keeping my opinions out, just noticing my own bias, just reflecting on my own triggers, just listening deeply and empathically. So yeah, I just want to reflect that, because I think that if we're the design of a course, which is online, experiential, and the core practices have to be listening and dialogue.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying you're looking at empathy as dialogue, and that the example is ULab, which actually starts with empathy, and that seems to be the part where people get the most out of, and then it starts getting kind of dense, and then it's not so, they don't get as much out. So it's just the importance of learning the aspects of dialogue. How do you dialogue? And it is like the important component. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I've heard you talking about from the beginning, is dialogue and listening, and how core that is. I would agree with that. I think as well, there's something about self-awareness, you know, so any tools that increase your awareness of your own bias, your own beliefs, your own frame of reference, because it's in the way of being able to stand in someone else's shoes. You know, you can't see past your own reality. So how do you really start to notice that your reality is subjective? And just because you feel it and just because you experience it doesn't mean it's true.
Jessica, you had something you wanted to say?
Sorry, I was processing what Polly was saying. I was just trying to replace myself in the context of the whole conversation. I go back and forth with the notes, and I wanted to know where we were at, if we were still in the why, and why we need empathy, and I'm hearing Pauline might have started with reflecting what Edwin was talking about, dialogue and listening. If we are getting into the how the MOOC can look like.
Yes, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Okay. From everything I've heard, it sounds like that the MOOC, not only first by clearly explaining a why, it seems that it needs to be also anchored in, not sure how to express that, anchor in the, oh yeah, there was two things. I was wondering, because we kept talking about adults and children, and I had a question actually. Do we need a MOOC per audience, like trying to tailor more other exercises, or the whole MOOC about you are parents, and then so all the exercises, all these examples would be about children? You know, like, is it something that a MOOC would be more powerful if we focused on maybe a group, or if we just say it's for everybody and then we put everything in the same place? Like, I was having this question as we kept going with children and adults and parents and teachers, and the other thing was just for me to know where we were at in the whole thing, because it's 1 p.m. here. I mean, we are halfway, and I needed to replace myself in the field. Like, where am I?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I say that we were sort of going down the list of what Pauline had written. And then, so that's one part, is where are we? It seems like we're kind of jumping around a little as well. And then I was hearing, like, what does a MOOC, it seems like we're sort of have agreement that we need a MOOC. And it's like, what does it look like? And we're looking, your thing is like, what is the scope of the MOOC? You know, is it Do we have a specific, is it for everyone? So that's kind of what I was hearing so far. And for the scope, I was looking at like the broadest audience to begin with, something that has as broad of a, like the book, I think is for, you know, pretty much anyone. You could go from, you know, teenagers up to adults at any age. So it's very broad. And if we started with sort of something that was very broad, you know, we can always then create something specific for parents or for business or something, but, you know, trying to get the broadest audience. So that's kind of where I was on that.
Okay.
So, I think what you're saying, Edwin, is that we starting with a model, and then this model we can just bring it and adjust it to each setting. You know what question was coming to my mind while I was hearing everyone is, and I know that someone said, okay, you display empathy and people will want to bring it back because they feel how it makes them feel. How do we motivate people to want to learn empathy? What will bring them to go to that online thing that will teach empathy? I'm good with my life. I don't have time for that stuff. To text with my friends, I don't need empathy. Just a question that came to my mind.
Yeah.
That's funny, because that's I think why I was wondering is do we need to focus on special audiences, because that's by specializing our, like, the problems. If this is a broad audience saying come and learn empathy, unless there's people like us, which there are a lot, but if our goal is to touch audiences who need empathy but don't want it, that's the tough part.
I mean, I'm
yeah.
Sorry.
Go for it, Pauline.
Yeah, I suppose I'm now understanding that it could be very broad and diverse, and it could go this way and that way. I guess my assumption from the beginning, which is maybe wrong, was that the target for this are adults who are working in fields where empathy is essential for change. So in terms of social change and social justice, and perhaps it will attract people who are already somewhere down that road, but they become like beacons who can then, you know, because that's the way I saw ULab growing. There was kind of a lot of different change makers and people who were already thinking about doing change in a different way and feeling a sense of frustration about the disconnect in organizations and in politics and in NGOs and in the environment, and wanted a model and a practice that would shift something. But it then very quickly proliferated, you know, into schools and into universities and into community groups and lots of other settings where you wouldn't expect. And I think that if you have people who are passionate, who get on board, however you hook them in, they become the kind of advocates, and, you know, so that was my assumption. And I'm now thinking, oh, that was quite a big assumption that I was making, because actually you're right, it could be any number of things depending on what we choose. Yeah.
Well, one thing is the book, I think the reason that Bill Miller wrote his book was that he saw the political polarization that's happening in the country. He was concerned about that. So that was sort of, one of the last chapters is about how do you overcome that political polarization. That now that you've learned these skills, go out and try to talk with someone across the political divide. And so that creates kind of a motivation as people who care about society, you know, and the well-being of the country, that they can help address this political divide. And that's kind of what I'm hearing too, is that, you know, what is the motivation? What's going to have people like want to take these steps? And Pauline, I'm hearing it's, you know, change makers are maybe going to be pulled to this, as well as people working in social justice, that this is something that might be a motivation, like a tool for them. So we're kind of like looking at, yeah, what we're really, it's kind of like what motivated us is one question. What will motivate others too? It's really,
yeah, there's something there for me, Edwin, about just when you said that there, actually maybe you don't need to specify this is for change makers or this is about social justice. Maybe it's, you know, the invitation, maybe if it's worded well, could attract any adult who's interested in empathy for their own practice, whatever their practice or their context is, and to maybe allow them to have their full adult capacity to self-select and to decide for themselves. And if we are talking about almost like a toolkit in a set of skills, as you get in the book, then you could imagine to suggest contexts or applications, or that doesn't need to be defined.
So it's more about really for any adult to address their own kind of problems, and here's this toolkit that can help you address your own issues that you're dealing with.
On a small scale, large scale, so you could give some examples, but maybe not be prescriptive. I don't know.
Could we use the notion of personal development?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one level, isn't it? And the personal development is probably foundational to everything else.
There needs to be a choice to do that, though, right? And what's that choice based on? Is it based on the notion of dis-ease? Then do you have to get to a point of dis-ease to feel that you need that change, that shift?
I mean, there may be people who are already working with empathy and with compassion and with dialogue at work. There may be people who are involved in some pretty disconnected environments who want to look at an approach. It may be impossible to predict who might be attracted.
Yeah, so there's it's like the dis-ease is what I'm hearing there, is it's like there's this point where we talked about, someone mentioned it before, hey, I'm doing okay, things are going wrong, okay. It's when you've got kind of that crisis that people are saying, hey, something has to change, and that's the dis-ease part, right?
Yeah.
That, hey, I'm really willing to make a shift. The way there's something I've been looking at is sort of looking at the cultural, having a term, what I call a culture of empathy, is it seeing, we can kind of frame it, the training in terms of, for your own personal, benefit, sort of from an individualistic way. But also what I'm looking at is kind of a cultural shift, that we're living in this social system, and to think from a systems, sort of more of a mindset, that we're looking at the whole relationship, that those personal, perspectives are part of a larger, culture of empathy. And how do we move, society towards a culture of empathy, move from authoritarianism to, democratic, mutual decision-making? How do we move from good versus bad to really seeing situations within context and seeing it empathically? How do we move from being a culture that's, competitive to collaborative? So it's sort of, we're looking at a larger cultural shift in having an awareness of the overall society, that there's a need for a societal transformation. And within that, there's sort of individual perspectives, but there's also holding the larger social perspective, awareness as well.
Edwin, I think what you've articulated there is absolutely brilliant. And there's something for me about, could the course be structured as an inquiry rather than us coming up with answers and then giving them? Ooh.
Can it be structured as, I'm sorry, I didn't understand you, Pauline.
As an inquiry.
As an inquiry, yeah.
Yeah, so like these are the questions that generate the thinking, and the kind of the curiosity and the engagement in the culture of empathy. What would it take? I mean, I can't remember your exact words, Edwin, but you know, when you were just articulating there, like in the form of questions, what would it take to shift from where we are now, from authoritarianism to kind of something more democratic, to this individualistic perspective, to a culture of empathy? Again, making the connection with ULAB, the idea of moving from ego to eco, so that we're part of a living system, we're part of an ecosystem, that it's actually in our interests to connect. How do we connect? Through empathy. I've also just remembered the phrase that you used as part of your invitation, which really attracted me, which was about being an empathy activist.
It's lovely.
I really love that idea.
Can I build on what you were saying, Edwin, is about the notion of a societal shift? And for me, that brings up the question of what does society looks like? What is a society? And that then brings up the question of where do we spend most of our time? And we spend most of our time at work, or working, doing something that is productive. So even if it is entrepreneurship, if it is working for a government, if it is political, there still is a sense of engagement that I think work offers a container, if you will, Pauline, for that notion of where to begin. And I think it may be in the work environment.
So it's like, how might we, I was kind of hearing, Pauline, how might we build a culture of empathy that it's an inquiry? Like, it's sort of like, how do we go about doing this? Let's kind of explore it, maybe break it down to the different areas and just have it be sort of a series of questions. We're kind of doing that right now. This is sort of an inquiry right now. You know, move from ego to equality, move from authoritarianism to, you know, co-creation. And then I was also hearing it's about what does society look like right now, and but most right now where we spend most of our time is at work, and maybe at work is this place to be, you know, making these changes, bringing, if I understand that correctly. Was that it, Bunny? Kind of it's like, how do we kind of transform the work? I guess make cultures of empathy within the work environment.
Exactly. It's just a touchstone for us to consider a MOOC. Or, I mean, if we consider where we spend most of our time in a day, it's relating to interacting with others. So if there's any shift to happen, any culture societal shifts, it may be within that interactive environment.
Yeah.
And I would oh, sorry. I would build on that too. It's like within the design community, they pose a problem as how might we? So it's like, how might we build a culture of empathy? So I was hearing like, how might we build culture of empathy at work? How might we build cultures of empathy at home? And so each of these questions becomes a sort of a design question.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
I think that's brilliant. That gives us a sort of a grounding for where to take the notion of teachable empathy.
Yeah, and when we're thinking of how to design culture of empathy at work, I'm coming with the picture of, okay, work can be school, work can be hospital, and hospital is a society in itself. Work can be different clusters of people together, working in government, working in a private company, working in an international company, kind of different kind of work cultures. And some are based on profit.
So there's different contexts. So it's any kind of group of people that get together. How do we build cultures of empathy in those clusters, those groups of people?
I think that's exactly what I'm feeling, Edwin, is that understanding that we do group together. I would say underneath even that is the notion of relationships, personal, professional, our parenting relationships, our friend relationships. I think based societal shift is based on the building of healthy relationships.
So how might we design cultures of empathy in relationships?
Yeah, that for me is even one step beneath the notion of at work, at home, at school. It's the fundamental notion of empathy in relationships.
I was wondering in this place we're going of the MOOC can be a whole inquiry. How does the book fits in all of that?
Yeah, it's like, how does the book fit into this inquiry approach?
One of the clarity I had with chatting with you, Edwin, last time was that I had not realized that the idea at first was to take each chapter of the book as one module for the MOOC. And I love the idea of like transforming the MOOC more into a big inquiry at work, at home, at school. And I was having the book on my left and I was like, okay, so what do we do now with the book?
Yeah, it's like just...
I don't know how to make the bridge.
Well, I was stepping back, like it's like the whole direction is kind of like totally open right now, right? We're kind of doing the inquiry to see, you know, what would work, and do we, you know, is there a different way, you know, maybe instead of using the book, or, so I'm kind of open to kind of, you know, what we do.
I can see how you could use both. I think there's a place for content in the course. I think if it was just all inquiry, people might say, well, why am I doing this course? Because all you're doing is asking questions, and I came here for some practices and for some insight, for some content. But so you could still potentially use material, concepts, practices, definitions, theory from the book to stimulate thinking and to kind of like a signpost into different parts of the course. But you could also still set up some of those questions as an inquiry that would engage people in a kind of an adventure of, developing empathic practices, piloting, exploring, feeding back, if the MOOC was able to be interactive in some way.
Do you mind, Pauline, giving a concrete example of how you envision using the content of the book with an inquiry, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I'm that evolved and developed in my, but I guess so. Say, for example, you were talking about empathy as listening, and you were referencing the section of the book that really talked about that. You could then share that from the book. You might point to videos or other content that says the same thing to give that real kind of grounding, that we haven't just made this up out of our heads. It's actually other people are thinking about this. So it and watch it and discuss it. But maybe we might suggest to people that they form groups for discussion, or that they take a concept away, or they maybe do a listening practice. Maybe there's some interactive place within the MOOC where people can share their experiences or post their videos, or so we're not just delivering something that we've cooked up. It becomes something that people can add to, and it becomes generative in some way.
Mm-hmm. All right, I like that. Yeah, I think I see clearly. Like it's more. First, I don't know why. It might be very linear, but as you were talking, and I was processing what you were saying, I picture like just a drawing of a figure in my head, and it would be like a person, and the person would walk, and and the first step would be, okay, walking with this intention of like, I want to practice empathy. And along the way, the figure would encounter all the difficulties about it. So the roadblocks of empathy, or like, but no, you and every step would be an opportunity to, like you said, maybe using videos, maybe using an empathy circle, and using different tools for almost like each step of like what people might encounter as, like yesterday I tried to practice empathy at work, and that's what didn't work at my job, and
I love
that's what I pictured for some reason, like someone exploring that and walking and like stopping at every stop and like, oh no, that's a struggle, and trying to destructure that and understand and go deeper and then move on to the next.
Yeah, so there's something about a journey and something about stop-off points, milestones, places where you can step off the road and try something and then come back on and continue. Yeah, and
it fits with this idea of empathic listening. It's not just a technique, it's a way of being. It goes back, like, I like what you said, like it's a journey, right? Like it's never going to be perfect, and it's not the goal. I'm feeling very inspired right now. That's cool.
Yeah, me too. That felt quite synergistic.
Yeah. I'd love to hear what you guys think.
Yeah, it seems really comfortable to go into what is this intention, and finding a way to reconnect with this intention of empathic connection, if one may say, and bringing strategies around how making it happen, so that this world will look like what we want it to look like.
So are you speaking about measurement of success along the way?
Are you asking me, Bunny?
Anyone? Is that what?
I was more. Oh, sorry. Excuse me.
No, go ahead.
So your question is like, is it like almost like level up of like, oh, you pass something, and there's okay. I was more picturing more from in your journey through this the art of learning, the art of empathic understanding. what kind of struggle you might encounter, and the struggle we would use that, the question of a struggle, like I was thinking of the roadblocks, for example, like one of the first thing we might tend to do is doing sympathy listening, not really empathic listening, and that would be one of the first struggle. Oh, I tend to do more like that. So, and exploring that, using the struggle of what you will encounter in this journey to explore it, and I had not really pictured a result or a reward or like thing. It's just like, for me, the idea is maybe the journey is a circle, like maybe it's not linear, like, because it's really like, it's kind of like that a bit. And
Yeah.
I was more thinking of exploring what kind of questions, difficulties that someone might encounter in their journeys, to explore deeper.
And as I'm listening to you, Jessica, and as we're generating this kind of possibility of this kind of course, which is kind of a journey, it doesn't have to be linear. People have experienced the situations that are a struggle around empathy. It feels to me that there would need to be something in the model that enables people to engage with content and then take away ideas and practices and work with them in the real world context that they're in. And that might be work, it might be family, it might be school, it might be politics, it could be anywhere. But when they come back, then they're offering their reflection, they're offering some kind of insight or question, further questions. So that suggests to me that they need a community to do that with. Someone there to receive that reflection, a group, maybe, they have to set up a group, or maybe they have to create some sort of community, or maybe we offer some facility for people to come together in a Zoom chat room or whatever. It feels like it needs to be really experiential and interactive, with reflection, self-awareness, maybe journaling, place to put the reflections, a body of practice and a body of knowledge that can develop and proliferate. That's what I'm, from what you're saying, I'm imagining it becoming almost like it could proliferate off in lots of different directions. And we need to create a structure that supports that somehow. It's less about the content and more about what people do with the little nuggets of, ideas or practices.
Yes, I love that. Yeah.
So maybe I can reflect what I'm hearing so far. Is I was hearing it's about the intention that we want to learn empathy. And it's a story of taking a personal journey. And what do we encounter having this intention of wanting to learn, or maybe even the intention of a culture of empathy. We want to build a culture of empathy, and sort of having, maybe we need some clarity about exactly the intention and the experience of that. And we're on this journey to develop an empathic way of being. What is it that the blocks and the personal experience that we have in doing that. And then there was also the aspect of a group journey, that it's not just maybe an individualistic journey, but maybe we're in a group and we're doing a shared journey together to, so how do we have some content that is that people can engage in, but that's not just the focus, it's sort of the real lived experience in the real world context that we go out, we have these experiences, we come back in and share those experiences, and so we're going to need a community, there's a need for like a group, which we sort of have here too. We do have the group. So that's so one thing I had thought of is that aspect of a team, that you take the course as a team, right? It's not just on my own, I take this by myself. but that we form teams, be it online or in person, and we have some sort of a journey that people can engage in, and then have these discussions and dialogues. So that's just what I wanted to add.
Well,
Nicely done, Edwin.
So
Go ahead. I wanted to thank you. I wanted to add to what Jessica and Pauline were saying, and what you've beautifully articulated, Edwin, is our sense of this being a journey. I would like to highlight, however, and go back to the notion of the roadblocks and what they are in listening well. I believe that the practical notion of addressing those roadblocks, the practicality of our exercises, and I'll tie it into what Edwin has created for us, is the notion of activities. And let me give you an example of, I have been thinking about an activity to foster empathy. And it would be just a very succinct overview of the activity would be develop 3 questions that you would ask, or you would articulate, not even questions maybe, statements that you would articulate to someone who is grieving. For instance, how are you? How are you doing? Is one question that you hear a lot when you're grieving. But I would suggest to you that creating that question in an empathetic manner can sound a little bit more like, how are you doing today? And if there's anything I can do, let me know. That's for me, that was always very heavy in my obligation to reach out. And so the activity then will be for me, and I would present it to all of you as a team as a roadblock, then is how to create the language that is empathetic surrounding grief, other than simply the repetitive, there's a word that I'm missing here, it's just a repetitive, conservative, lines that we ask of people who are grieving. And so for me, that's just one activity, but that to me is a roadblock. That is an activity that we might be able to use to get over that roadblock. So for me, this is about then addressing the roadblocks and being very practical in our journey of developing empathy by using the activities that we create. I've just present that to you as an option.
Yeah, I could just reflect that. So what I'm hearing in terms of the realness of what we're doing is to take an area that to be addressed empathically, and that grief is a real issue for people who are going through grief, and people just kind of respond with these ways that it's just kind of like, Pat, how are you doing, or whatever, but it's not really necessarily deeply empathic. So how might we design ways that people can interact with people who are grieving that's very empathic and supportive? And that's like a real thing that people are going through.
And to create those activities, Edwin, to look at that as an activity for us as a team to create scenarios that could be transformational for people in a MOOC. To say, well, let's come up with a statement or a question, and how can you transform that into an empathic statement or question. So it's a practical nature of the activities that you're suggesting.
So
I really,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I'd really resonate with what you're saying, Bunny. I'm really interested in language and how we can create emotional distance or emotional connection depending on the words that we choose to use. And sometimes that's very unconscious, and I think it's well intended, but my experience is people saying just the types of things that you're describing. Oh, how's it going? Is everything all right? Or how are you today? And not really meaning it. And what I was thinking about, the true meaning of compassion is to suffer with. So there's something about how you approach someone, and language is part of it, but body language and a willingness to be open-hearted and to create a space is important as well. And how might you then approach that person in a different way with the intention of making it easy for them to speak, or hear, or to cry, or to whatever it is they need to do, and without controlling that space or shutting that person down. It's a real skill. I mean, in the work you do, it will be a skill that you have, but how do you teach that? It needs to be broken down almost into components.
It could be viewed as one of our roadblocks. How do you speak to someone who's harassing you? How do you empathetically? How do you let go of a relationship empathetically? There are so many roadblocks that I think we can create as real life opportunities for learning in our journey to create a MOOC. Does that sound fair, Edwin?
Yeah, I'm writing it down.
Thank you.
So it's, I was hearing about, it's like we're design real life empathy activities to address real life issues. And, there's going to be it's what I'm seeing is we would need sort of tools that could be applied to different topics. We already have, we have grief, we had harassment. I can't remember what the third one I just heard was.
Ending a relationship.
Oh, ending relationships. And so there's going to be all kinds of these real life situations. So almost each one becomes a design question, right? Like how might we design empathic solutions to this? Because I've actually, about grief, is my partner, her mother just died, and I was at the hospice, for a week while her mother was going through it. And I had all those questions too. How do I really, am supportive, and what is a real empathic approach here? And so I was really curious about that too. So so to make it, but the essence is how do we make it, real, not just kind of
and our work as practical, not just theoretical.
Yeah.
I'm writing that down, practical and not just theoretical. I write as fast as I can.
You're doing well.
Okay. So do you want to go through any more of these questions? There was...
May I ask you a question, Edwin?
Yeah.
When you were just talking about these different design parameters that you believe each situation might require, did I hear you say that we might require different tools? Can you say more about that? I wasn't quite sure what you were meaning.
Oh, so when I bring up about design, there's a lot of empathy work done in the therapeutic world, in the mediation world, but another community that's doing a lot with empathy is the design community. So the human-centered design, which has a real center here in the Bay Area and in Palo Alto and Silicon Valley, they have a whole tool set for how do you design solutions to any problem. And their methodology is that every problem is sort of like empathy starts with empathy. You need to hear from everyone, like, what's the issue around, you know, to empathize with the needs of the people that you're designing for. So empathy is a core component for the human-centered design or design thinking. And it's actually in some quarters called empathic design. Because it puts empathy sort of at the center of design. And so when I keep saying design, I'm kind of like referring back to the human-centered design process that, you know, we're kind of designing here. We're starting with sort of empathizing with each other. And we're kind of looking, and we have this design question of how might we design this empathy training MOOC. And we're sort of exploring all the different ideas, we're gathering them, and then with time we're going to kind of hone in on one area maybe that we want to focus on, and then it's like we, you know, go into having creative solutions, and we kind of create our prototypes, and you know, then design is iterative. And in fact, this person, Applied Empathy, he has this really, you know, this design company in New York. So they design for companies like GE, Levi Strauss. He's been to the U.S. military at West Point. So they have a whole design community. So I guess that's kind of what I was referring to.
That's really interesting. Okay, thank you.
So empathy might be fashionable right now?
Edwin, can I ask a practical question?
Mm-hmm.
The resources that you have for this course, you know, because obviously there are different ways of hosting and different technologies and, you know, resources that you can bring to make it more or less interactive. Or what's your thoughts on that when it's up and running?
Yeah, I was imagining like a multimedia online course is something like the, you know, beginning with, it's the book by Bill Miller, you know, Learning Empathic Listening. And, you know, we have resources for creating videos, maybe like right now the book is just text. It could be someone speaking. It could be, you know, eventually we can get into role plays, you know, because that's a big part. We can model role play. So everything that we do can be a multimedia, you know, component to it, that a group comes together and they go through it, go through this journey, and, you know, how the journey works, you know, is kind of what we're kind of exploring here. And yeah, so I don't know if that's kind of, so I'm thinking multimedia, all kinds of graphics, video, could be even, you know, drawings, cartoons. There's a video by something about why empathy. I don't know if you've seen that video. It has 27 million views on Facebook. I mean, it's like, you know, have a little video like that. Get those folks involved. To, you know, hey, we'd like to create some, you know, engaging cartoons. So it's yeah, it's kind of like the whole multimedia, interactive, get groups together. That's kind of initial, yeah.
What's it called, Edwin? Why that YouTube video? What's it called?
I can't. I have it somewhere. I can email it. It's why is empathy important, or something like that? The importance of empathy. I think, yeah, 27 million views. I think it was 17, 20. It's huge. So
it's not the video of Brené Brown, like sympathy versus empathy, no?
It's a little cartoon, just a, you know, like a little graphical cartoon.
Thank you.
It's interesting.
So yeah, so where do you feel we are now? It seems like we're kind of exploring maybe what we've written. I've taken notes. I can also put this, video online that we can go through, and somehow maybe it needs to kind of get shaped or organized. Or
I mean, Edwin, do you imagine like literally co-creating the content with the people who are in these groups with you online?
well, initially I'd thought of, well, we do the as a prototype, we just go through the book, and that would be just that the book is like a course already that we could sort of just prototype it and then put the resources online. And is to get started, anybody could just buy the book, and there'd be a support material, and that gives us our first sort of prototype. And then we just keep, redesigning and keep getting better. So it becomes an ongoing empathy training. But we had a prototype to start with. But it doesn't have to. I'm kind of like opening it up, and if there's a better approach,
I think it doesn't have to be either or. I think that is like it's kind of you've got a place to start there, and things can happen quickly. There's lots of other possibilities are opening up, but they could become overwhelming. I was just thinking, because this book took 3 weeks to get to me from the US. So I don't know if it's available to download.
I think there was a choice. Yeah, I think there was a choice either to buy the hard copy or to buy it online.
As an ebook.
Yeah, I think so. I was actually wondering, I like the concept of going through the book that seems so simple when you start reading it, and if you really, if you really sit with it, it brings a lot of deep, useful concept. I was wondering, Edwin, why you chose this one as opposed to all the variety of choices you have in front of you. I mean, you interview so many people and gurus in the field. So I was wondering what attracted you to that one, and you said, this is the one I want to use to do this exercise.
This is the only one that I know of. It's a real step-by-step. The rest are kind of more theoretical and kind of analytical. And this was a real, here's the lessons. And I don't know if that whole shelf, those 2 rows are all books on empathy. I mean, really, those 2 shelves. And none of them go into the real how-to. They're kind of more, they might have some little lessons here and there, but this was, I think the other part is from my experience, it seems like the empathy circle is one of the easiest ways to kind of learn and practice empathy. Like everyone here is a good listener, everybody's like respectful, we're all listening, you have experience. So, we have it sort of embodied in us, like everyone here. But in a lot of situations, people, even though they think they're good listeners, they're not. They have some of those blocks and they don't realize it. So it seemed that practicing in a group would be a good way to learn and practice. And the book is sort of guiding people into how to do that empathic listening. So the idea was that people would do empathic listening, be practicing, and they'd be learning kind of like components of the listening through the book. So that was sort of the kind of the thinking there, and that once they really learn that, then we can kind of expand from there or sort of redesign it because the book doesn't address the cultural aspect. Like we talked about the culture of empathy, and the book is sort of geared from an individual, you as an individual listening, and not so much how do we transform the culture. And I think there's a need for that cultural aspect. So that's something that could be brought in to the training, kind of added. But it was just like, here is the beginning, something to begin with, So.
something concrete that was step by step.
Yeah,
Follow those steps that seem easy to transfer into a teachable tool.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I like
So,
that concept. I didn't realize it was the one, the book that would explain empathy in a practical way. It's quite fascinating. Yeah.
yeah, there's, and he has a lot of experience. He's been doing this for 40 years. And he kind of expanded the empathy into motivational interviewing, which is used in a lot of medical institutions, you know, for addressing drug addiction and alcoholism. So he's like saying, how do you listen? How do people make a shift, you know, from being, you know, from alcoholism to, you know, getting over it? And you need motivation, and the empathic listening, you listen for the motivation, and you really give a reflection of that to help the person develop expand their motivation for making the shift. So that's his additional, you know, build on, but it all starts with this basic empathic listening skill. So
That's so powerful.
yeah, it is. Yeah.
To be able, through empathy, help someone deal with their addiction. Wow.
So I
Thank
guess,
you for this.
I guess the question is, what do we do next? We've got all this material. I've been taking notes, you know, best I could. So what would be a good way forward for the next meeting?
I would be happy to go through this book as was originally planned by you. I like
following
that idea.
its chapter.
It can be 2 chapters or more, whatever we decide as a group. I mean, yeah.
Can I add to that, Rita? I think that's a good idea, and it takes us back to the original kind of plan. But I also wonder whether, kind of in terms of generating the course, we could also offer our own experiences and examples and links as to what we're reading. So, for example, if I'm reading about listening, I might think about other theories or other practices that I use and offer them as an accompaniment or as an enhancement. Or that might not necessarily need to be discussed in detail, but I might just post those links and offer, you know, that to share, or so that we're not just talking about that book, we're actually using it as a stimulus to generate something else.
As a stepping stone to bringing all the other components, you're saying, from different sources that we value as practitioners. And
yes. Yeah.
So addressing the practical, right?
Yeah.
So what would be the structure of the meeting? Like, how would you see we'll have 2 hours, and, you know, how might we structure like a basic, do we just have a discussion like we're having here? Do we want to do empathic listening, you know, practice the lessons in the book, or so what would be kind of effective? So I know, Jessica, you had mentioned, well, we could have the book be the first hour, and then we just open it up to kind of to open discussion the second hour.
Yeah, at first I had decided that when like, you know, as we read the book, like if there's any questions appearing, that maybe the first hour could address that. Like I'm guessing if someone has a question here, people during the MOOC might have as well the same questions.
Yeah.
And maybe talking about that, and maybe from the question we ask, maybe we can use that as maybe roadblocks, and then out of that, maybe coming up with an exercise, a practical exercise to address. I don't know. And then,
yeah.
Because there's also in the book, there's also in, I think at the beginning it's more like the theory, but then he gets into the try it. So it could be also something easy to use for us to, there's thing that he said, try it once, you read the thing, like chapter, I'm looking at chapter 5, roadblocks to listening. And he said you can try it and pretend like you find an empathy buddy and then practice each other not listening to each other. So we can maybe also in the circle in here practice what empathy does not look like. And like you were saying, you're using role plays. I like role plays. I can really play very good someone who's not listening.
A lot of fun, isn't it?
Yeah. So I was thinking a bit of like that here.
Okay, so it would be, we use the book as sort of a gateway, but then you can bring up anything. You can share your experiences, you can share links, you can bring up like practical things from your life, like, and you can share those. And then we can also do the exercises as well as come up with our own exercises is kind of the, and then would we use empathic listening or just keep it an open discussion? Like,
I think we should use the listening. Yeah.
You mean, do we want to do the empathy circle, Edwin?
Yeah, do the
in
empathy
a structured
circle
way?
in a structured way, or for some or part or all.
I was wondering if we could do that. I know you're not recording that though, because it might be too personal, but in the check-in, would it be a good place to spend, 10 minutes while we do I think today we spent 10, 15 minutes doing the check-in and using that as the empathy circle, because I feel to understand and go deeper in the book, I don't need empathy. I need empathy, when I do the check-in, like, oh, I have some issue at home. It's a bit tough right now. That's what I would want empathy on.
Yeah.
I don't know, as an idea.
Yeah.
At the same time as you saying, let's keep the empathy practice to practicing empathy on what we check in with. At the same time, because we're creating an empathy space, kind of, I wonder if even in our conversation, it would be connective to, like those exercises that we're trying to bring into the workplace, before bringing my idea, connecting with your idea before I go and explore mine. So using that empathy reflection, at some point, even though we are experts, we can use the practice for in this empathy space.
Yeah, and Rita, I think we've done that. I think we've modeled that. That's how I felt for the past 2 hours. Sometimes I hear, oh, let me reflect that on that. Let me check if I really understand. And I feel we've done that naturally. And this is how I actually envisioned our exchange of question and stuff about we are modeling it. Is it what you're saying? Yeah. Okay.
I'm saying we are modeling it. I also wanted us to do it consciously, continually. Because when we say, let's just do it for the check-in, we may fall into making regular conversation. And I don't know.
Okay. You want it to be reassured. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That it's there.
Yeah, that it's not that like, okay, empathy circle done, check, boom, allez up. And then we do something else. I see what you mean.
Yeah, I think what I heard you saying, Jessica, was to model the empathy circle practice in the check-in in a very structured way.
Yeah.
But what you're saying, Rita, I think, is to keep the rhythm of listening and reflecting through the whole conversation.
As we have been doing indeed. Naturally. Thank you both, all of you.
Okay, then there was, so we start the next meeting with the check-in. Maybe everybody gets 5 minutes. We do the empathic listening, like a direct reflection of an empathy circle. And then there's like a looser, the second part is a looser empathic listening. I don't know what they call it. Process, kind of like we've been doing. You give sort of, sometimes you reflect, sometimes we don't. It's not, and we're not like taking turns. It's kind of more of a popcorn discussion. Is that?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Okay, is that thumbs up on everybody? Is that sound?
I thought that there was some following of the chapters in the book. Are we doing?
And then we would do, what chapters do we do? Do we start with the preface, chapter 1 and chapter 2? Does that? I think we did that last time, so we would do 3 and 4 since we sort of talked.
I mean, I wouldn't mind recapping on chapter 1 and 2 because I didn't have it. But maybe just to reference it, so chapter 3 and 4 make a bit more sense.
So we kind of recap and then also go into 3. And then the chapter 5 is blocks. That was like a whole meeting in itself. That's
I think,
yeah. And okay, then I think we're set then for the next meeting. And so I feel, just checking out here, I feel pretty like we got a direction. We've kind of co-created this, and I think this is a good way to start, you know, what we're doing is have this kind of discussion. So I feel pretty good about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, everyone just want to share is before we go quickly how you're doing, Jessica.
I feel very inspired. I feel clear. I got clarity. I felt very connected. You know, the synergy with Pauline, and then Bunny talking about practical, concrete exercise really resonates. Rita, you know, mentioning that continuing doing it, but like I feel very aligned with everybody's what we want to do. I feel on the same page, and I got more and more excited as we go. So I'm feeling very well right now.
Pauline?
I just want to echo everything that Jessica said. I resonate with all of that. Yeah, and I feel the same. Really inspired.
Bunny?
Yes, me as well. I'm on the same page with everyone as far as inspiration and feeling a lot more centered than I did at the last one.
That's good.
So thank you, everyone.
Rita?
Inspired, resonating, and loving this empathic community.